Hello everyone, welcome fellow Googlers and guests. I'm very excited today to introduce an incredibly inspiring person, author, and speaker, Joe Plumeri, who is here today to share a bit about his new book, The Power of Being Yourself, a game plan for success by putting passion into your work and life. Joe Plumeri is the former CEO of Willis Group and Citibank North America. He now serves as the vice chairman of First Data Corporation and a member of its board of directors. His passion, honesty, and sense of purpose flows through the pages of his book as well as his speeches. So please join me in welcoming Joe Plumeri.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it very much. First of all, I should tell you why I wrote this book. I am not a writer. I don't do that for a living. But I have a passion and I have a point of view about things. And a couple of years ago, I started to think about, as you all do, about life in general and how things are going. And I said to myself, you know, it's interesting how we all celebrate authenticity in this country. We think authenticity is great. We see people who are genuine and we say that person is really a real person. And then we see everything's filtered today through emails, texts, Instagrams, Twitters, LinkedIns. And by the time you get through all of that stuff, you wonder what's true and what's false. I see in companies people send emails because they don't want to be there when people are reading it on the other end. And I think about how unfamiliar we've become, you know, with each other. I watch television and I see people read off of teleprompters, and I ask myself, did they really write that? Did they really feel that way about the subject, or is somebody else feel that way? I see people on television get choked up and begin to cry, and they apologize immediately for crying, and I ask myself, why are they apologizing for being themselves and being genuine about who they are? And I think about our society, and are we being disconnected with how we really feel about things? And so I wanted to write this book. I had it in my head to do it for all of those reasons. And then a couple of years ago, my son, my now oldest son, was running in the Boston Marathon, and it was the day of the terrorist attack in Boston. And you'll read about it in the book, and it's really what motivated me to really write the book. When I saw people's emotions that day, I saw them caring for each other, I saw people helping each other, I saw people terrorized, and I said, why do we have to wait for an occasion? Why do we have to wait for a wedding, a funeral, or a catastrophe for people to really show who they are? Why can't we be that way, you know, every day? So what I did was to set about stories in the book about being yourself, either my stories or other people's stories, and I didn't do it by virtue of chapters. I did it by virtue of principles, things that I believed in, so that when you read the book, it's not something you put back on the shelf and say, okay, I read that book, but it's something that you could use every day and something that you could remind yourself all about. And I tried to be, and I know I was, as transparent as you possibly could be, because otherwise the book would not have integrity. I'm just going to talk to you about a few of the principles. One of the principles is we all got the same plumbing. Now you're asking me, what is that all about? What that's about is I've traveled throughout the whole world. And what I found out is that whether you're from Asia, or whether you're from Indianapolis, or whether you're from South America, or wherever you're from, everybody feels the same feeling that we all do. And that if we understood that better, maybe the world would be a little bit nicer and more peaceful, because I have traveled the world. I was the CEO of a British company for 13 years. And you would think, when everybody talks about the British and being stiff and stiff upper lip, and they don't laugh a lot, they don't do all that kind of stuff, I found the direct opposite of all of that. But you hear that, and you begin to think that people really don't understand what other people are all about. When I got to this company, it was called the Willis Group, didn't make very much money, didn't make any money at all, so I had to do something to get everybody engaged in the company. And so what I did was, and I didn't know this, but I created these little pins that everybody could wear with Willis on it. And I thought that if everybody wore a pin, they'd become, sort of like part of the company, and everybody would start to feel a sense of, being a part of things. And I didn't know the British don't like wearing pins. Nobody told me that. As a matter of fact, they really disgusted with the pin. But they knew that when I showed up, if they didn't wear the pin, that I would give them a hard time, which I never did. I just stared at their lapels to see if they had a pin on. So when people would walk down the hall, I always knew that they didn't have a pin on, because a woman would go in the men's room and a man would go in the woman's room, so they wouldn't confront me. And so one day, and I knew that this happened in the company, they felt that when they confronted me, they have to know what was going on. They have to have a reason not have their pin on. So I get to one guy, and I look at his lapel. I don't say anything to him. And he says, "Oh, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I don't have my pin on. I left it on my pajamas." When you think about that, and you think about that kind of humor, you wouldn't think that that would come from what your perception is, of a Brit. We dedicated a building in London a few years later, made the company successful, became a global company, and I built a building in London right across from Lloyd's of London. So I have to dedicate the building, and they say to me, who are you going to have to dedicate the building? I said, me. I'm going to dedicate. But apparently in London, you don't dedicate buildings unless you have royalty in these buildings. So a friend of mine says, I can get you some royalty. I said, who could you get? He picks up the phone, and he talks to Prince Andrew. Now, I come from a neighborhood in Trenton, New Jersey. I don't know royalty from Adam. But he gets the prince to show up for the dedication. Now, in advance of the dedication, I get a long list of things that you're not supposed to do when you're around royalty. One of them is you don't touch royalty. You just kind of, put your hands and you don't touch them. And I said, that makes me nervous because I'm a toucher, I'm feeling like I did with all you. I said hello when you came in. It's the way I am. So I meet him outside the building, and interestingly enough, he drives up with his own Range Rover. There's no entourage. He just drives up by himself. He gets out of the car. So I feel more comfortable with him. And it's going to be like 3 or 4 hours before the two of us dedicate the building. So I take him around and so forth. And I said to him, I got to tell you, I'm a little bit nervous. He said, what are you nervous about? I said, I'm nervous because it's a long list that says I'm not supposed to touch you, so I want you to know in advance before I'm arrested that I might touch you. I'm sorry, I don't mean it. So we dedicate the building, and during the ceremony, I give a speech. And during the speech, I read a note from my mother, who was alive at the time. And the note, said something to the effect that, thank you to the Prince Andrew for being nice to my son Joey. My mother's from Italy, and she appreciates it very much, and he's very honored, and he's very nervous, so please take care of him. Something along those lines. So I read the note, everybody applauds, get a standing ovation, and as I turn around, the prince is there, and he gives me a hug. And everybody's astounded that the prince is giving me a hug. And I said to myself, again, isn't it interesting when you have a perception that people don't do those kinds of things, that really we're more alike than anything else. I've never gone around a world, any place, where because I'm pretty enthusiastic, as you see, where I've said to somebody, nice job, good job. And they've said to me, stop telling me I've done a nice job. I'm tired of hearing that. Or they said to me, you're too enthusiastic. Don't be so enthusiastic. We all got the same plumbing. I've never heard anybody, any place in the world tell me otherwise. So if you understand that, as you're dealing with the world, the message in that principle is that you're dealing with the world. We may look different, we may talk different, but at the end of the day, we all got the same plumbing. We all got the same insides. we all got the same heart. And it's really important that we begin to get in touch with our heart, even here, where it's the center of information. Here at Google, there is one thing you can't do. I Google all day long. I got a piece of information I want, I take my cell phone out and I Google it. But one thing that you can't do, and you ought to try it, is try Googling your heart. Or try Googling my heart. And you'll get the lyrics of a song. You'll get the way the heart is shaped. And what I'm talking about is your feelings and how you express yourself and how you relate to each other, which is really, I think, important in a society today that is lacking that and is lacking the risk-taking and everything else that you need to do. So that's the first principle, and it's really interesting stories, and there are other stories about people who have the same plumbing in the book. Another principle I talk about, which is really interesting, is make your heart your teleprompter. Now you'll ask me, what's that about? I go to speak at the Georgia Dome one year, and usually when you go speak, they want you to, to test the microphone or to test whatever, right? And a guy said, let's work on the teleprompter. And I said, I don't use the teleprompter. He said, well, what do you use? I said, I brought my own teleprompter. He said, nobody brings their own teleprompter. What are you talking about? I said, I brought my own. He said, where is it? I said, my teleprompter is right here. It's my heart. I speak from my heart. I don't read from a speech. I don't read from notes. I speak from my heart. And what I mean by that in that principle is that today, nobody takes any risks. Nobody goes out and does anything unless a poll is taken. Nobody does anything unless a survey is taken. Nobody does anything unless there's a consensus. Okay, and then it's okay and it's safe to do, instead of going out and actually doing what's in your heart that you think is right. And I tell a couple of stories in the book about that. One of the stories I tell is in 2000, when I became chairman and CEO of Willis. The first thing you do when you become a CEO is you look at all of the things that happened in the company. And the company wasn't doing well, so I wanted to see everything that was going on. So I looked at the benefits policy. And the benefits policy did not include benefits for domestic partners. And I thought, that's not right. I think benefits should be given to domestic partners. I think everybody should be treated equally. Now, if you go back to 2000, that wasn't fashionable. Nobody made me do it. There was no polls and surveys or rants and raves about everybody being given equal rights domestically and benefits in companies. I just thought it was the right thing to do. So I changed it without anybody asking me to do it, because in my heart, I thought it was the right thing to do. In the company is a guy by the name of Brian Urie, who is a broker at Willis, and eventually he gets married to Bill White, and they have a big wedding at the Four Seasons restaurant in New York City. I had no idea why this guy was at Willis until that night. And he gets up to give the speech at his wedding. There's 700 people there. And he gets up to give a speech and he says, I want to thank Joe Plumeri, because without Joe Plumeri being at Willis, I would never be here tonight, or marrying Bill White, which right after New York changed the law to be able to be married. And he went on to say, when he was looking for a job in New York City, he found that the only insurance broker in New York that he could find that gave benefits to domestic partners was the Willis Group. And I want to thank Joe Plumeri for changing that benefit, or I wouldn't be here tonight. Up until that night, I had no idea why the guy was at Willis. And he mounts that in front of 700 people that just moved me so much, because I said to myself, if I hadn't done what I thought was right, he wouldn't be here, he wouldn't be getting married, wouldn't be in New York City. And I wonder how many people are holding back from doing what is right and in their heart and being themselves, rather than waiting for a survey or conventional wisdom to tell them what to do. you'll see in the book, there's a foreword from a man by the name of Joe Califano, who none of you have ever heard of. But you notice these days that not many people smoke much anymore. If I ever told you that people wouldn't smoke in pubs in Ireland or places like that, you'd be amazed, because that's what they do. They were wrong doing that. Well, who's Joe Califano? He was the domestic advisor for Lyndon Johnson in the 60s, and you might have read about the Great Society, which is where Medicare and Medicaid come from. So if you want to know where Medicaid and Medicare came from, it was the Great Society that was written by Joe Califano under Lyndon Johnson. He was the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare under Jimmy Carter. In 1978, he declared that smoking be prohibited in federal buildings and in airplanes. And there was such an outcry that he was fired by Jimmy Carter because of banning smoking in 1978 in federal buildings and airplanes. And after he was fired, he dedicated himself, because the headline said that Joe Califano called smoking slow motion suicide. So if you're wondering where the non-smoking thing started, when if you see television series that go back to the 50s and 60s and everybody smokes, if you're asking yourself, where did it start? Who started this whole thing with no smoking in buildings, and you can't do that, you can't do this? It was Joe Califano. All because in his heart, even though he knew he would be fired, he thought it was the right thing to do. How many people today, knowing that they're going to be fired, do that? People don't do that today. They do what's politically correct today. They know that I got to do what my boss tells me to do, even though it's not the right thing to do or society tells me to do. But that's where the whole non-smoking thing started. So to me, he didn't need a teleprompter to tell him what to say. His heart told him what to say, even though he knew he would be fired. And the foreword of this book is written by him, and I am proud that that's the case. There's another principle in the book called Let Sadness Teach You, which is one that I share and want to share with you. It's about my relationship with my son, Chris, who passed away 6 years ago because of drug addiction. At 13 years old, he was anorexic, as it turned out, because of a self-esteem problem. My relationship with him, from the period of 13 years old until when he died at the age of 40, was obviously contentious, and one where I tried very hard to rebuild my relationship with him that hadn't been built before he was 13 years old. And I tell as transparently and as truthfully and in a raw way what my relationship with him was all about. I did all of the conventional things that you should do. Send him to hospitals, send him to therapists, send him to every place that you can send people to go to be rehabilitated. But we never regained the kind of a relationship that we should have, because I think as I was starting my meteoric rise, if you will, to the top of the corporate world, I wasn't the parent that I should have been. The reality is that I neglected my own son, even though I did the cosmetic things that you're supposed to do to get him help. Maybe I say to myself, I should have taken a year off of work rather than worry about the next board meeting. And I tell that story, and he even, interestingly enough, I remember I was working, the company I was running was owned by American Express, and he was arrested for credit card fraud and went to jail for 18 months. And I went to visit him every weekend, but I could never seem to repair the damage that had been done because of the neglect that had happened. I tell that story And I tell that story not only to parents, and I tell that story not only to children of parents, it goes both ways, is that I think one of the most important things in life are the relationships that you have. Don't neglect them. If you're a parent, the most important thing you have to do is to make sure that you're close to your children. When you see them, hug them, tell them that you love them. If you're a child and you're listening to me now, and you're talking to your parent, hug them, tell them that you love them, because at the end of the day, the last thing you want to do is feel the regret of not having that relationship. I talk about the pain of discipline and the pain of regret. When you think about life, it really gets down to those two things, doesn't it? You either have the pain of discipline, which is the short-term pain that you have because you got to do something. But when you think about it, it doesn't last very long. It's just short-term pain. But the pain of regret, when you've ever felt regret, lasts longer and it just never goes away. And it's those kinds of things in life that I think are important. And I think about my son, and I think about the regret that I had with regard to that. And it's something that never goes away, and I think about it over and over and over again. And the same thing relates to friendships that you have. If there's somebody that you haven't talked to in a long time, or somebody that you're meaning to call, or you're running something, yeah, I've been meaning to call you. I got to tell you, do it before it's too late to do it and you regret not having done it. By the way, that same reason, this whole idea of neglect not only applies to children and parents, friends, but also applies to clients. For people that are listening to me with regard to business, the number one reason you lose a client is neglect. You can make all the mistakes in the world that you want, but the one mistake you can't make is neglect them, because they'll go someplace else where they feel there's love. It's a wonderful principle for you to read. And when I say, let sadness teach you, I tell it so other people don't go the same thing I do. And the last principle I'll talk to you about is called look up, not down. In 2008, we're all going to have adversity in life. I was running Willis in 2008. For those of you who remember, the world fell apart in 2008. Had the Great Recession. The banks were closed, no credit, couldn't buy anything. Terrible time to be around, frankly. So in 2008, I make the decision to buy a company for $2 billion, which is a lot of money, not only in 2008, but at any time. It's supposed to close in October of that year. The problem is between June and October, the world fell apart, so all the financing that I was supposed to get, I got, but only for a short period of time. Instead of it being permanent, it was temporary financing. That's in October, and the deal closes. In November, my son passes away. So between October and November, I don't know what worse could happen to me. It's the time when I could, two choices. I could go dig a hole and jump in it, or I could get up in the morning and go attack my problems, which I think you should do. You should always attack your fears, because your fears are your limitations. If you don't overcome your fears, you're going to be limited by them all your life, and so I had to go attack them. I talk about that. It turns out that I had after I made this acquisition, this other company, Hillbrook Allen Hobbs, had 5 offices in Chicago. And what I needed to do was to merge the 5 offices they had and the 2 offices that I have, and so that they could be more efficient, we can grow one culture rather than have all these offices spend more money and not have the same culture. So I looked to see in Chicago where there was a lot of buildings with that room, with that space. And the one place where they had a lot of space was the famous Sears Tower in Chicago. You all heard of the Sears Tower in Chicago, which is no longer called the Sears Tower in Chicago, and I'll tell you that story. Tallest building in the Western Hemisphere. Nothing like it. The problem is that it was less than 70% occupied, and the reason is when the tenants' leases came up, they were all afraid that the next terrorist attack was going to be the Sears Tower, because it was the largest building in the Western Hemisphere. So as soon as the lease came up, they got out of there. So there was a lot of empty space. So I thought I had a great opportunity to negotiate with the owner a good deal because he had a lot of empty space. The banks were not lending money. The credit markets were closed. What a great opportunity that I could turn adversity into something that's really terrific and positive. So I meet with the owner and I say to him, I need 250,000 square feet, which is, by the way, about 3% of the building. And he says, I have a lot of space. I could do a good deal for you. I knew I could. And he says to me, so what would you like to pay? I said, well, what's the average rent in the building? He says, $35 a square foot. So I said, I don't want to tell you what I pay. I don't want to insult you. He said, tell me what you want. It's okay, tell me. I said, no, I don't want to insult you. He said, no, tell me what you want. I said, $10. He says, you insult me. So I got up to go away. And he said, no, he says, no, let's do something. I'm making a long story. That's a wonderful story in the book. We arrived at $14.50 a square foot. Now, for anybody who's in the real estate business or even renting, you know that $14.50 a square foot is like nothing. I mean, I don't know what it is a square foot here. This is like hallowed ground where I am now, right? I mean, you're talking, I'm serious, hundreds of dollars a square foot. This is $14.50 a square foot in the middle of Chicago, the largest building in the Western Hemisphere, $14.50 a square foot. He says to me, do we have a deal now? I said, not exactly. He says, what do you want now? I said, you know what the problem with this building is? It's a jinx. I says, it's a jinx because the Sears name connotes that a terrorist attack is going to take. You need a positive name. He says, what name should I put up there? I said, Willis. Nobody knew who Willis was. They thought it was that little kid on television. You know, what's up, Willis? And he says, Willis? Nobody knows Willis. I said, you put Willis up there. I said, you'll get a new positive name rather than the old Sears name on the building. So he says, I got to think about it. I don't know if I can do that. Comes back the next day. He says, I can do it. He says, but I got to tell you, I got to charge you. Now, we've been negotiating now for days. He said blue, I said black. He said white, I said green. We never agreed on anything until he says that. And I say to him, okay. He's startled that I agree with him. He says, you'll do it? I said, absolutely. He says, do we have a deal? I said, not exactly. He said, what do you want now? I said, I'll give you $1 million if you give me $1 million worth of business, because we're not your client and you need to insure the building. So you give me $1 million, I'll give you $1 million. I said, you do that? He says, if I do that, do we have a deal? I said, not exactly. He said, why not? I said, you partners who are not my clients, you got to get them to give me the business. So we finally decide on the deal, and we renamed the building the Willis Tower, which is what it is today in Chicago. I only took 3% of the building. I don't own it. I didn't own it. I used to wear my pin. And people would say to me, are you the guy that bought the Sears Tower? And I said to myself, I got a long story and a short story. The long story is too much to tell. So I said, yeah. Sure, I bought it. It's interesting that the night we dedicated the building, Brian Williams, the famous Brian Williams, says to me, how, after all these years, it's been called Sears, and by the way, Sears hadn't been in the building since 1993, how is it you show up and change the name? I said, I asked. Now, strange as that sounds, see, what it's all about is you got to wake up every morning with a core belief. And whatever you want to believe, you believe. I believe anything's possible. If you believe anything's possible, you're going to ask. We live in a world where the possibilities are less and less and less, rather than more and more and more. And I tell you that story, and I want you to remember it, because don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to feel that anything is possible. By the way, today, the Willis Tower in Chicago is now almost 100% occupied. not because the economy came back, but after Willis moved in, they changed the name. United Airlines moved 2,200 people into the building. And then 6 months to 9 months later, United Airlines and Continental Airlines merged to become the largest airline in the world. And where's their headquarters? The Willis Tower in Chicago. So after all that adversity, and after all of that upset with the economy, my son, you got to be positive. You got to believe anything is possible. And you have to face adversity and face your fears. And as you look at that tower, and when you see it on TV, and you will, or somebody mentions it, and you will, and they will, just remember the story. That anything's possible. You got to ask. And so the book, and I offer you those principles as just some idea of what's in there, some examples of what's in there. Going to make you cry, it'll make you laugh. It's good. That's what we're all about. It's to cry and to laugh, and at the end of the day, feel better about life and feel better about yourself. Okay? Thank you very much for listening, everybody. I appreciate it. Want to do Q&A, or anybody have any questions?
Hi, Joe. Thanks for the talk.
Thank
really
you.
Inspiring.
Thanks for coming.
Yes. I'd like to know how many books you have written and what inspired you to write about this book and share with all of us.
As I said in the beginning, I've always felt that I think technology is a wonderful thing, and I'm standing in the center of the mecca of technology. But I think technology should not be instead of people, it should be on behalf of people. And I think that we overuse our sense of connection and information and our communication with each other. And our society has become more mechanical, than it should be. I don't write about it in a book, but maybe I should have. But when I took over Citibank, I noticed that all people did all day was email. This was back in 1995. So I shut the email system off. And I don't know why I didn't write about it. I shut the email system off, and they thought I was crazy. Because I saw people weren't talking to each other, and they were emailing each other in the same floor when they could be talking to each other and, and saying, hi, how you doing? Because, again, I go back to so many people send things because they don't want to be there when somebody reads it. And they don't want to feel the emotion on the other side. And I think that if you look at history and you look at what's moved this country, what's moved the world is people's emotions, their courage, their sense of invention, their sense of creativity. Look where I'm standing. The creativity and the invention that took place here because people had the sense to take risks. And I want people to sit around the dinner table by virtue of this book and kind of reconnect, to each other. And that's why I tell these stories. And if I could start that conversation and have people start to communicate a little bit more than we do now and start the narrative with regard to that, I got to tell you, you're looking at a guy that cries a lot. I don't mind telling you I cry a lot. I've been the CEO of a lot of companies, and nobody ever told me I was a weak guy. Nobody ever told me that I cry, so therefore they didn't think I was tough. I was tough. But that doesn't mean I can't show who I am, and I think the more that we do that, the closer our society becomes, and maybe there's less Fergusons, in the world today. So that's what inspired me to write this book. Answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Is that the only book that you have written?
Yes, I'm not a writer. I'm just an Italian kid from New Jersey. I'm not a writer. I don't do that for a living. I just had the inspiration to want to create the dialogue with people about what's in their heart. And hopefully more people will be inspired to use their heart more. I think that it's really important in our society.
So you've talked a lot about how you used your heart as your teleprompter, and I was wondering if you could comment on your own personal preparation process, because obviously when you have an hour to speak with all of us, there's some points that you want to make, but at the same time it's important to be genuine in your delivery of it. So.
That's a great question, because you would have thought that I prepare. As you can see, I'm just talking. I don't. As friends of mine, my wife is in the back. They're laughing because I've never read a speech in my life. I never have, because I know the subject. I know what I want to say. There's 8 principles in the book, and I just picked a few that I thought you'd relate to. And there's lots of others that are fun, to talk about. But the preparation is the intensity of my thinking. I don't think you ever stop thinking about what you're doing. Lots of times, my wife Susan, who's here with me today, she sees me staring into the abyss, or staring at a wall, and she says, "What are you doing?" And she knows I'm processing in my mind what I want to say to you guys, But at the end of the day, it starts here, but it comes out, over here. So the filter is not a big one. But if you feel it inside of you, and it's what you are and who you are, then the integrity shines through. You can tell me whether I'm fake or not by virtue of the way I do it. So that's the way I process it.
Thanks.
Okay?
So much of our schooling is focused on mathematics and that sort of preparation for the business world. Do you think it's important to instill this relationship building and other things in kids early on? And if so, what is do mechanism to do so?
Thank you, Angela. That's a very good question. In my day, they called that liberal arts versus the sciences. I think it's really important. I think not only when you're a child and today a sense of competitiveness, a sense of striving. Browning said, "Your reach should exceed your grasp," or "What's a heaven for?" And we seem to be breeding in a society today a class of children or people where average is good. I don't think that's good. I don't think the people who founded this place sought to be average. I think they sought to be different and extraordinary. So I think as kids are in school, it's really important to instill in them a sense of who they are, allow them to allow them to speak the way they think they should speak and what they feel. When you go to business schools today, and I speak at business schools, there's very little taught about what it really takes to run a company. You got to know about balance sheets, and you got to know about income statements and taxes and all that kind of stuff. But I really think what's important is inspiring people. And they don't teach inspiration. They don't teach motivation. There's a principle in the book that showed away to Grandma's house. And Grandma's house is a metaphor for a vision that as a parent, you eventually, or as a child, you went on a trip with your parents someplace for a long distance. And eventually you got impatient. And eventually you asked, when are we going to get there? Everybody goes through it. And the parent usually responds by making up something that gives you a vision of how exciting it's going to be when you get there, if you just be patient and settle down, right? So in a way, that's a vision for the future. Companies should do that for employees. People like me should get up and say, let me tell you where we're going. Let me tell you my view of Grandma's house. This is where we're going, and it's going to have cake and ice cream and candy and toys and all the things that are nice, or put that in terms of business. And the reason that's important is so you could endure the trip. Why do you show up every day? What's your participation or contribution for what you do to make the place better to get to Grandma's house? And I don't think they teach that, anymore in school. People just show up, and you get paid hopefully well. But there's no sense of really what do I have to do with what happens when we get there. So I'm a big proponent. I've said that at business schools. I've said that at universities. I think we need to do more and more to instill that in our children. I frankly, a granddaughter who's 13 years old, and there's a lot of conversation that goes on with a machine and very little that goes on with the talking. And so when you sit down and you have dinner and there's no machine, it's very difficult to converse when you're not used to doing that, because you can say a whole bunch of things, and somebody says a whole bunch of things back. And believe me, I am not anti-technology. I just don't think it should be instead of people. That's all. And I think we need to reinstill that back into our society.
Joe, thanks so much for joining. Your thoughts, sharing them has just been great to hear. You know, the optimism and dynamism is apparent from your story.
Thank you very much.
From what you shared. So my one question was, I wonder if there's maybe a certain point, kind of a specific time or place or an experience where it all kind of clicked for you and you felt that, you know, having the optimistic path to life is the way to go, as opposed to, you know, maybe being a little more realistic or being a bit more, you know, pessimistic about things, you know.
I have always...
or maybe you were always like that.
You're asking me a very good question, which makes me think whether there was any defining moment, which is what I think you're asking me. And I don't think I had a defining moment. I had a defining father. This guy thought that nothing could ever go wrong. I never seen, when you're hanging around role models like that are positive, it's really infectious. And he just never believed, it's in a book, by the way. That's why I can't tell you the whole book, then you won't read it. But it's in a book how positive he was. But I'll tell you a story, and it talks about what he did. And when you read that, you'll see where it comes from. Because all my life I watched him, and I watched him engage with people, and I watched him be optimistic, and I watched him just be such an influence just by hanging around. So there was no defining moment for me. There was just like a whole bunch of times that I saw him be positive. And there's a piece in the book where he used to come and watch all my ball games. I played sports. And one of the stories I didn't tell in the book, so I'm going to tell you. And the guy who helped me write the book, Steve Kepman's in the back, and I should have. I think of all these things now. I don't know why I didn't. I played football in college, and you can tell how good I was, and how good the team was. We went to play. University of Virginia, and they had lost 27 games in a row or something like that. And if we beat them, they would have set the NCAA record for consecutive losses or something. And so we went to Charlottesville to play them, and I had such a terrible day. I fumbled. It's just everything wrong, and they won because of me. And so I got in the locker room, and my head was down, and I saw these shoes show up in front of me, and then it was my father's shoes. And he said, "Why's your head down?" And I looked up. I said, I didn't play well, or something like that. And he says, "What do you mean? You had a great day." I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, 40,000 people now know who you are. When you have that kind of influence, and you'll see that we owned the baseball team. And I remember one time, and again, I didn't put it in the book. Our team was a minor league affiliate of the Yankees. I don't know, we lost 16-0. He'd always go in the clubhouse after the end of each game, and he would say, great game. We lost 16-0. And the coach would say, how could you say we had a great game? He said, everybody tried hard. Everybody did the best they could. And that was the kind of guy he was. So when you hang around that, all your life, which goes to another message, hang around people that are positive influences. Stay close to people who can be helpful to you and not drag you down, but pick you up. You got those choices. And I think that's where I got mine from.
Just as a follow-up. So it sounds like it's almost kind of this tendency to resilience, which maybe you cultivated just from seeing your dad and,
Yeah, and I think, I think you're all a product of something. And I was a product of what I saw. And I was lucky enough I could have saw something else or seen something else that would have been not as productive, but I had the privilege and the good fortune of seeing somebody that had a positive influence. The guy just wouldn't give up. He just kept bouncing back up again. Yeah, and so that's why I think it's important, and there's subtle messages. And you'll see cut a path is the chapter or the principle in the book, which talks about my father and my grandfather and the legacy in my family of always cutting a path. There's choices you have in life. I gave you one of them, pain, discipline, pain, and regret. The other one is cut a path and leave a trail, or let somebody else cut the path and you follow them. In business, first to the market wins. In life, I think you just go cut a path and then wait for everybody else to want to follow you. They're not the ones that are the winners. This place is a great example of that. So he was always a person that cut a path and left the trail, and I've always been the same way. And in business, it's called be first to the market and you win. Same thing with your customers. If you have a customer, you don't sell them, you help them. It's subtle things like that that make you feel and want people to do better, and they're positive.
So my question is, you mentioned that you kind of regret not having spent more time with your son before he passed. After he did pass away, did you see a change in kind of the amount of time you spent with either family or time you took off, or in terms of how much you worked? And then, as a learning out of that, and then what kind of things do you recommend for people these days to kind of...
The answer is yes, I have. And frankly, when I was on a plane last night, I asked my wife, he had a daughter who's now 13, who my ex-wife and I adopted, and her name is Elizabeth. And so I'm the father and the grandfather. I worry that I don't spend enough time with her. I mentioned that to my wife last night. I said, I got to spend more time with Elizabeth. I don't know that I had even asked that question before the tragedy. I wouldn't have even asked it. I think I'm pretty close to my other children, but I get paranoid that I'm not, because when you go through something like that, you're constantly questioning, whether you're doing the right thing or not, whether you said the right thing or not. But I think it's healthy. I think it's healthy that I constantly question, am I doing this right? Or I constantly question, am I spending enough time, like I should? All because of the experience that I had. And as long as I keep questioning myself, I think that's healthy, So my recommendation would be, don't go through what I went through, but keep questioning everything that you do personally, with your friends or with your family, and question whether or not the relationship is as tight as it should be and as heartfelt as it should be.
Just really quickly, on the subject of questioning yourself, how do you balance questioning yourself versus confidence?
Question yourself versus confidence?
Yeah.
I go back to swagger. You know the word swagger?
Yeah.
Do you ever think, everybody always says, well, that guy's got swagger, that lady has swagger, right? And there's something cool about swagger. And so I always try to think about what swagger would be if you defined it. And this is what swagger is, right? You ready? North of confident and south of arrogant.
Got it.
You got it?
Yeah.
North of confident. You want to be around confident people, but you don't want to be around people that are arrogant, right? You want to be around, this is a confident person who has a sense of class, style, and has respect for people. And so you want to stay south of arrogant, north of confident, and that land right there is where you want to be, and that's swagger. And always keep asking yourself, did I do something that was confident, or did I go above the line of arrogance? Okay, is that it? Got it? North of confident, south of arrogant is the swagger you want to have every day when you think anything is possible. Okay? I want to really thank you guys for coming today. It's really been a lot of fun. I appreciate it. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk to you and spending time with you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot.